The last session of the 2023 Volunteer Engagement Series. My name is Sydney Shutrow, and I am the Director of Volunteer Engagement at the Tennessee Commission on Aging and Disability. So I cannot believe that we've already completed another year of the series. Like in a couple weeks, it's going to be October, and it blows my mind. Thank you all again for supporting me in this ongoing training opportunity year after year. For anyone new to the series, we have all the presentations all the way back from January 2020 posted on our Tennessee Commission on Aging and Disabilities YouTube channel. And by the end of the day tomorrow, I'll have this presentation posted along with a follow-up email with the session resources that Jared has been so kind enough to share with us. I do want to do my typical disclaimer that these webinars are being recorded, so please be sure to keep information confidential when we're talking about volunteers, clients, or community partners. Please be sure to put yourself on mute to reduce the background noise for our speaker. And now is also the time to turn off your camera unless you want your face recorded, which is totally up to you. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, please feel free to type those into the chat box and we'll address them as quickly as we can. We've had a lot of fun this year with the reactions function and giving our presenters some feedback throughout the presentation. So let's do a quick test to make sure everyone knows how to engage in the presentation. So if you look probably toward the top of your screen next to where it has the chat and the people button, raising your hand is going to have a reaction with a smiley face. Oh, Jared found it. So let's do a couple questions. If you want the series to continue in 2024, give me a heart or a thumbs up. All right, I'm getting thumbs up. Ooh, I'm getting a clap. Even better. Awesome, awesome. Another one, if you also cannot believe that this is the last session of the series, give me a surprise face. Or maybe some of you will give me a smiley clap like, yay, it's over. Awesome, thank you so much. I hope that'll give us some more engagement throughout the presentation. It is important to remember that everything we talk about on these webinars is not required for you to implement in your programs. These are simply best practices through research and experiences. However, if you do like what you hear and want to implement a suggestion or strategy, be sure to have the support of your supervisor or management before moving forward. Without further ado, I will turn the presentation over to our speaker to introduce himself and start our discussion on other tasks required. Everyone, please join me with the applause reaction in welcoming back to the series, Jared Peer. Jared, thank you so much for speaking with our group again this year on a topic that I think we're all going to be able to relate to pretty well.
Well, thank you very much. It's an enjoyment to be here. I want to let everyone know that this presentation was inspired by an article on quiet quitting. So I wanted to just preface it. Quiet quitting became a buzzword recently because a large portion of the workforce feels exhausted and burned out. A lot of this is rooted in multiple pandemic years of long hours in understaffed, constant turnover organizations, but also from employers trying to streamline by combining jobs or expecting more work from fewer employers or employees. Chris Edmonds, CEO of the Purposeful Culture Group, says the rise of quiet quitting is largely tied to organizations pushing additional responsibilities on employees who are already stretched thin. As a little bit of evidence, a Gallup poll in 2023 indicated that 59% of workers feel disengaged at work. 18% admitted that they are showing up to work but not actually doing much. And 44% of employees surveyed said that they feel a lot of stress at work. And 51 admitted that they are actively looking for a new job. Talking about managing extra tasks, especially the ones that stress you out or burn you out, couldn't be more relevant. But quiet quitting itself isn't likely to win you any points with your coworkers, bosses, or volunteers. It becomes apparent quickly when you are disengaged in this field. Managing volunteers is all about authentic relationships. Doing the bare minimum or ignoring tasks because you just don't want to do them is a recipe for termination. So today we want to talk about healthier, more practical ways to tackle extra tasks that aren't directly related to your role as a volunteer leader. Everybody knows every job description includes some version of the boilerplate responsible for other tasks as required. We all recognize this as corporate jargon for "we can ask you to do anything." These extra burdens are often the tasks that will burn you out fastest, so it's worth taking some time to discuss how we can manage these interruptions of your normal job role. Nowhere is this more important than in the position of volunteer leadership, which often becomes the catch-all for a wide variety of secondary tasks that disrupt your real mission. So today we're going to cover these topics: how we got here, how to assess problematic tasks, basic strategies, as well as advanced strategies. We will provide at the end of this my contact information, and Sydney will be sending out a slide deck, so you'll be able to see all our notes for this presentation. So you don't have to furiously write them down. But how we got here, there's always a discussion about what is volunteer administration. As volunteer leaders, we often feel it's self-explanatory, but it isn't always to everyone. A lot of my friends always tell me, "We're proud of you, but we don't know exactly what you do." And a common experience is when you hit up LinkedIn trying to find out how much the average volunteer coordinator should make, you don't find any reliable information. Often LinkedIn or Indeed.com will send me job leads that aren't even remotely related to leading volunteers. The struggle is real, and it's because volunteer administration isn't generally recognized as a profession. For example, leading volunteers isn't listed in the American Standard Occupational Classification System, and it isn't recognized as a career by the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. We do a lot of work, but nobody really recognizes us as a profession or a career or an industry. And this lack of recognition means we often don't have industry standards. There's no consensus on things like how much volunteer leaders should make or what essential tasks volunteer leaders should do. There are 1.5 million nonprofits in America, most of which use volunteers and many of which pay employees to manage them. Despite this, there isn't even a consensus on what title to give us. Some of us are called an administrator or a manager, a leader, a coordinator, a supervisor, or a director. Then they tack onto our title of volunteers or volunteer services, volunteer programs, of community relationships or strategic partnerships. There isn't even a consensus on what department we should be under organizationally. Some organizations have volunteers under HR, finance, education, public relations, guest services, or community relations and partnerships. You even find that different types of nonprofits have different names for their volunteers. Churches are primarily 1 to 3 ministers who are leading 100 to 300 volunteers. They just call their volunteers congregants, and the minister is typically called the minister of discipleship. All of your greeters, worship leaders, Sunday school teachers, elders, and deacons are volunteers in a church. We just don't call them volunteers. Museums, zoos, and other arts and culture organizations may call their volunteers docents. And so not having consistent terminology can sometimes get in the way of us being recognized as a career field. A lot of people just kind of assume volunteers do whatever needs done, and they don't really think that there's got to be someone behind the curtain, a Wizard of Oz, who's pulling all the strings and making it all happen. All of these organizations use tens of millions of volunteers in America, and somebody has to lead and train, onboard those people, but the rest of the world doesn't think about it. They just assume it kind of happens. Now, most volunteer administrators are their own HR department. So here's an example of some things we do. We do applications, we do references, background checks, interviews, training, and database management. And that's all, right? But then a lot of us end up also doing marketing and recruitment and public speaking and networking and building partnerships. And then on the side, we do project management, fundraising, grant writing, communications, event planning, and budgeting. It's also really likely that you're involved in counseling, coaching and advising, supervising, disciplining and dismissing, time cards, report writing, problem solving, client support or management. Anybody looking at this would be like, that's 4 different job descriptions. And so this idea that there isn't even a consensus on what nonprofits should use their volunteer for is a very real concern that lands us with a lot of extra things on our plate that we may not be equipped for or simply may not have the capacity for. We are in the people services business, so we enjoy doing a lot of these things, but that doesn't necessarily mean it fits on our plate. The problem is a lot of nonprofits will give it to you if it doesn't fit neatly in someone else's job description, especially if they don't understand what you spend your time on. They'll be like, well, Jared's probably got some free time. Let's give this to him. Or Sydney seems like she'd be able to take care of this. A lot of you may be doing newsletters, managing websites, doing the social media. You may get all kinds of things added to your plate. So one thing we want to focus on today is the core problem. Your organization can't expect a healthy volunteer team if they allow volunteer staff to be constantly distracted on side missions. If you're going to recruit, retain, and deploy a stellar volunteer group, other tasks as required need to be properly managed. So we're going to talk next about assessing problematic tasks. A mentor of mine, Karen, says, you can't expand capacity until you can articulate workload. I love that quote. As soon as she said it, I wrote it down. I was like, hold on, let me get that down in writing. Assessing anything comes before solving. It's a really good way to focus on it, because one of the other issues we'll run into is if you go to your boss and you say, that's not my job, they're probably not going to give it to somebody else. There's got to be an argument made. There has to be a logical solution provided, and the problematic tasks need to be assessed to be able to give you a little bit of a conversation starter about how to bring these forward. What we're talking about today is problematic tasks, and those are, I define those as the side jobs that keep you from achieving your main objective. Maybe you are great at graphic design, so everyone brings their stuff to you. Or you landed a reputation for being good at editing, so everyone wants you to review their content. But that's not what you're paid for, and your main role may start falling behind as you keep accepting all of these other side tasks. These tasks can burn you out or compromise your main role. And saying, that's not my job, will never get a task reassigned. Plus, you also don't want to sound like you're complaining all the time, especially if you have a legitimate concern about workload. You need to assess. I get that organizations do need employees to be flexible, and you always want to be a team player. We're not talking about getting rid of every task that you don't enjoy, or only doing the tasks that are exactly in your job description. But at the same time, we do sometimes have to manage the sheer volume of side tasks that we receive to make sure our primary job role is succeeding. And that starts with assessing the task to find the major issues. Then you can communicate them to the powers that be, and like Sydney said, get the buy-in of your supervisor to get some changes made. So here are a couple questions you need to ask when looking at a problematic task, something that's burning you out, something that you don't have capacity for. First question may seem obvious, but does my organization even need this? Think about it this way: most policies and procedures and programs and even job descriptions get cobbled together over decades by dozens of different people with different styles, preferences, and motivations. No one stops to assess if they are still relevant given the changes in your organization or the changes in times. You may feel bound by a lot of old traditions, but at a closer look, the things you're spending time on might not actually be needed anymore and could simply be eliminated. There are a lot of different reasons that tasks could be outright eliminated. They might be an outdated practice. A job description might have obsolete tasks built in, something that used to be done but nobody's even doing anymore. Or the tasks might be redundant now that the organization has grown or the community needs have changed over time. Some policies were made just because of one person 30 years ago, and so it's not even relevant today, but it's boxing in employees. Your predecessor did things in a certain way because it was comfortable for them, but that doesn't make it effective, nor does that mean that you need to do it that way. Ineffective processes can be updated or eliminated. Or tasks might be able to be eliminated if your culture, your community, or the vision of your organization has changed. Asking the question, do we still need this, is important. No matter how outdated, it's likely the task was never taken off your plate. Maybe it was in support of a program that no longer exists. And maybe it's part of your job just because 3 volunteer coordinators ago really was passionate about it. An example, and newsletters will probably come up. If your organization is doing a newsletter, maybe it makes more sense for you to write an article for it instead of producing your own newsletter. There's a lot of different things that you may be able to look at a task that's falling behind and reassess it. This is one of my favorite memes, training the new employee at work. So you're not really supposed to do this, but this is what we do. If you've ever found yourself saying this phrase, that is a task that needs to be reassessed. You know, it's like, oh, we do it this way, but nobody knows why. Or this is done because it's always been done this way. Or we're not really supposed to do it this way, but this is what actually works. Anytime you say something like that, that's a good time to take a step back and take a critical look at it. A concrete example, a museum near me was struggling to maintain an unwieldy newsletter mailing list. So I asked them to run me through their process. Every time that mail was returned, they would spend hours researching obituaries and land ownership records to see if someone on their list had passed away or moved. It sounds crazy to me, but 30 years ago, that may have made sense for their nonprofit. I mean, it was a small town feel, and the mailing list had 50 people on it, and they were all people that the museum staff and volunteers knew personally. But today, our county has 500,000 people. The mailing list has grown to thousands of people, and most people on the mailing list were just one-time visitors. They're not personal friends or loyal members. So I advise them to drop all the research. If something bounces back, just delete it off your mailing list and move on. If that person wants to get the newsletter, they'll reach out. But a lot of them are probably getting it online, subscribing to your social media. So just looking at a process to see if it's still even relevant can make a big difference. Your organization may have a lot of outdated processes or activities that no longer make sense, and you might be the fresh perspective that is needed to change them. The second question I ask is, does it advance volunteer program objectives? It's important to remember that it doesn't work for your organization if it doesn't work for your volunteers. Sometimes the quote, "it's always been done this way," needs to be challenged if it's detrimental to your program. And that's going to open up conversations where you can talk to your boss about, this is what we're trying to accomplish with the program, and this is what's getting in the way, and this is why it's getting in the way. A couple different ways can be used to assess this. First, if your organization has a volunteer philosophy, you can look at that and compare tasks to that philosophy and see if they help or hurt. Your program may have stated objectives. We have a handbook, and the first thing in it is what the objectives of our volunteer program is. Another area you can look for ideas from is your job description. Your job description is what tells you what the company values when it comes to volunteers. We'll talk in a moment about getting that job description updated, but your job description will imply what your organization wants out of their volunteers. And then if you get funding, such as grants, that may be even easier. Look at your task from your funding perspective. What does your funder require you to accomplish? And do those tasks help you meet that goal, or do they hurt you in meeting that goal? You can look at those different tasks by all 4 of these categories, and you may even think of some other ones. But occasionally you'll find a mismatch, and that's a good opportunity to ask your boss, do we really need this? What purpose is it serving? Here's an example. I run a volunteer program for aging adults. We restrict the membership to age 55 and older. Our grant dictates the age, the same grant that funds my paycheck. So those are pretty important numbers to me, and it sets aggressive goals for us. We need to manage 390 volunteers in that age bracket. It was obvious to me that no time would be available to recruit, onboard, assign, and supervise younger volunteers. The organization could surely use the help of younger volunteers, but the organization doesn't pay anybody to manage younger volunteers, and my staff's hands are full. So that created an opportunity to sit down and have an honest conversation about what we feel we can accomplish if our first priority is getting our grant standards met. One of the things that we were able to do is that we asked our local university to come out and train other staff members on how to request young college students to be able to do labor-intensive projects. That way, Jared's no longer having to request and manage all these side projects that involve a demographic that doesn't support his program's objectives. Asking if a task helps or hurts your program objectives, and then bringing your assessment to the table for discussion is just another one of our ways you can take a look at a program. Assessing from a cost perspective is important as well. Remember that cost speaks to nonprofits. If you can establish how costly something is and how little benefit the task brings, then you have a real case for change. Nonprofits are guilty as charged as hearing the word free and jumping on it. And so you sometimes have to be the person who steps back and says, all right, free from a monetary standpoint doesn't mean it's effective in other ways. Here's a couple other ways that you can assess whether something is cost effective. Consider the financial costs. That's the easiest way. Sometimes it's in dollar amounts. Other times it's in percentages of your budget. Are you spending 20% of your financial budget on something that only recruits 2% of your volunteers? That would be an argument for changing that process. Another thing to look at is time costs. Time is a major cost factor. If you're in charge of partially funding your own program, like looking at fundraisers, if it takes an insane amount of time but only brings in 5% of your budget, you're probably going to be better off if you don't even bother with the fundraiser. Looking at it from a cost perspective, how much time are you spending? How much staff time is being spent? How much volunteer time is being spent? Those are real costs. A lot of times in the volunteer services, we think of volunteer hours as an output, something that we accomplish, something that we receive, but it's really an input as well. From the organization standpoint, volunteer hours are something you are spending to accomplish more in the community. So if you're wasting volunteer time, that's a great argument for changing one of those things on your plate that may not be meeting goals. Other areas that cost things are space. For example, we generally only have 1 or 2 free cubicles in our office. The office would love to have 10 volunteers here every day helping, but the space cost of that would be enormous and the office isn't willing to provide it. So that gives me the ability to right size our office volunteer crew and say, well, this is the space you have provided, so let's talk about the office investing more in space before we talk about bringing on more volunteers for that capacity. Physical space can be a part of a lot of other programs as well. I run a senior angel tree. We get thousands of presents for hundreds of seniors, and that takes a lot of space. It takes operational space to audit those presents as they come in, to store them, to wrap them, and then to get them into distribution. And so after making a case against all the space we needed in that program, I wasn't given permission to get rid of the program, but I was given permission to right size it for the space we had available. So every now and then, talking about space. Think of energy as a cost or stress as a cost. If it's stressing everybody out, it may not be cost effective for your program. It's okay to look at things from that perspective. I'll give you an example. When I came on board, we were posting ads on a local volunteer site and 2 nationwide volunteer sites. It was exhausting and it led to all kinds of mistakes trying to collate these ads, update them frequently. Some of you may get drained by going online every 3 months to update all your ads on Volunteer Match or Just Serve. So what I did was I spent 1 month tracking the numbers. It turns out that from the local side, I got 26 leads in 1 month, and about 24 of those came on board as volunteers. The nationwide sites, I had received 150 views, but only 4 people indicated interest, and only 2 of them showed up to do the work. So after gathering that data, I was able to go to my boss and advocate for just focusing on the one that was making a difference. Now we post all of our ads on just one platform, and that helps us make sure that they're always accurate, they're always brought down or put up in a timely manner. We're not trying to juggle multiple ads across multiple sites. Another area we don't think of is the cost of our reputation. One great example, I think, is whenever volunteers are always asked for at the last minute. Volunteers do not like to be on call. Volunteers do not like to be emailed the day before an event to try and change their schedule. And so that damages our reputation as poor planners, as people who don't value volunteers' time. So whenever you have a problem, like staff always asking at the last minute for volunteers, a cost is a cost to our reputation. That this is not effective for anybody, which means it's not effective for the organization. Why don't we implement a new policy where staff have to give you abundant time? And another one is attention and focus. So I started leading volunteers at a zoo a couple years ago, probably 8 years ago now, and they were sending out emails every single day. So 0% of volunteers were reading their emails. It just became spam at a point, and people started ignoring them all. So what I decided was that we were going to change how we do things. We were going to collect all the needs until there were enough to justify sending out an email. We may have started sending them out once every week or once every 2 weeks at that point, and people gave me feedback that they appreciated getting emails that just listed what was available instead of these urgent last-minute needs every single day. People were losing the attention and their focus because we were bombarding them, but the fact is, we were able to change that policy because I was able to show a better way. Now let's talk about some basic strategies. Once you've kind of assessed and figured out whether things are cost effective and what things you really need to change, the things that are stressing you out, the things that are obsolete, the things that aren't working for your program, you need a couple basic strategies because no one likes a complainer. After assessing, we have to be able to propose solutions. You don't want to be that person who's just pointing out what's wrong. So the first question I want you to ask is, can a simpler method accomplish the same thing? We can simplify things in a lot of ways. One of them is technology. Think about what tools would make this task easier. What technologies exist right now? I could give you 100 examples. I'll give you one, for example, doing online forms or sending a survey. You can use a database instead of working off of Excels. We had to upsize one of our programs from Excel to a database. There's technologies that may make things easier. There are business card scanner apps. If you have 500 business cards and you can never find the one you need, there are apps you can put on your phone where you can scan the business card and it'll turn it into a contact for you. A lot of times, whenever there are just problems piling up, somebody developed a technology to solve that. You can also use technology to learn. Obviously, you could go to YouTube and learn all kinds of things there in a time-effective manner. Always think about newsletters as well. We used to send out a lot of newsletters. We don't do a whole lot of bulk mailings now. Generally, we will email it out to anyone who has an email on file, and then only mail it out to those who don't have an email on file. We were probably sending out 250 newsletters, and that took a lot of time to print, to fold, to stuff, to address label. It also costs quite a bit of money to get those all out in the mail. Now we email about 200, and we only mail about 50 of those. And so it saves a lot of time, saves a lot of cost. So thinking about what technologies can help. Another thing to think about is frequency. Would this work better if it was done less or more frequently? That's one of the important things to ask. I'll give you an example of more frequently. I used to get last minute requests for data. You'll probably resonate with this. Last minute, people would come up and say, hey, I need these numbers and I need them now, because they didn't do any planning, all right, because it snuck up on them and they didn't get it to me in a timely manner. I was probably running reports 52 times a week, every single week, or 52 times a year, every single week. And it's because people waited to the last minute. I'm a numbers person. I knew that I didn't hate the task of pulling numbers. I just hated the timeline of people giving it to me. So one thing is our grant only requires us to pull the numbers once a year. We had a sit down talk, and just about everybody agreed that if we pulled the numbers quarterly, so doing it 4 times as often, would kind of eliminate having to do it 52 times. Instead, when staff come and say, hey, I need these numbers, what I say is, well, I don't have those right in front of me, but I can get you the quarterly numbers. Would you like the numbers for the last quarter? Nobody has ever told me no to that. They really just want a data sample most of the time. And so that has helped us to eliminate the unpredictability of requests for reports, but also the sheer volume of last minute reports we were handling. An example of doing something less frequently is doing it in bulk, depending on the task. So I'll laugh because we just did this today, but every week we were having to go and restock a closet full of books, boxes of books, directories that we hand out. I realized that this was a weekly interruption. It would come up randomly, so it was unpredictable and it was recurring. So we decided to make it predictable and make it less often. We created some more storage space, and then we stocked the books in bulk. Now we do about 3 months of books at a time, which means we only have to do the activity 4 times a year. And since it's on a predictable schedule 4 times a year, I can get volunteers to come in to do it. So something that was a stressor for staff because we constantly got interrupted and it was dozens of times a year, we were able to plan to do it in bulk and limit that to 4 times a year. Think about frequency with things like newsletter. Doing a newsletter every month might be excessive. You might be able to do it every 2 months or quarterly. Honestly, for me, not enough changes from month to month to merit doing it. And it's always running behind every month. So we started pushing it back and started doing a quarterly one. Now it comes out on time. It still has relevant information, but the information as well, we're not having to generate new content every few weeks. One thing that every generation can agree on is this meeting could have been an email. And so another area to think about frequency is in the perspective of meetings. You know, is this something we really need to be meeting about every week, or could we do this monthly? Is this the kind of meeting we need to have every month, or is this a kind of meeting we need to have quarterly? So reassessing meetings that take a lot of time is something that is very helpful to reassess from a frequency perspective as well. Someone mentioned that not doing a monthly newsletter is difficult, and so I want to remind everyone as well that all of these are suggestions that you can think about. Everybody's volunteer program is different. I've got 370 volunteers right now. Doing a monthly email just isn't going to happen. So sort of it depends on your needs. A monthly one may work really well if your service activities are changing from week to week, and so you do have frequent updates. My service activities stay the same every month, the entire year. They can sign up throughout the year. So think about it from your organization's needs and from your perspective, from your program's needs. Not all of these will work for everyone. You may need a newsletter more frequently. So just think of it from these categories to see if they apply. The final thing about a simpler method is looking for a way to streamline. Can aspects of this be improved or simplified by streamlining? Look at tasks from multiple angles just to see if there are ways that they can be made simpler. We had a 4-day training at the zoo. Nobody has time to set aside 2 whole weekends to come train. Whenever I took that on board, I was like, you know, most of the volunteers just want to stand on the pathways and talk about animals. And they can learn about the animals on their own by talking to zookeepers, by doing research at home, or by reading the signs at our zoo. So why don't we trim down the training and then they can do on-the-job learning? So we were able to get it down to a day and a half. We cut out 2.5 days of training. So some things can just be streamlined or done in a different way. Is your newsletter 8 pages long? You could do it twice as fast if it was only 4 pages long, and it may not fall behind. We started shortening our newsletter instead of making it longer, and we get a lot more feedback from volunteers now. it seems like they're reading it more now that it's not a full long newsletter. Some of that depends on your organizational needs. Some of it also depends on the age and demographic of your volunteers. Volunteers who are seniors may have grown up reading the daily newspaper, but if your demographic is largely younger volunteers, they don't read newsletters. They don't produce newsletters. They're looking for things in small snippets. Some of it as well may depend on if you have content creators. If you're having to write 4 articles for that 8-page newsletter, maybe you can find volunteers who will write it, or maybe you don't need quite so many articles. So just looking at different things to assess, is all of this needed? And are there ways we can streamline it? We streamlined ours down to 4 pages. It has a lot cleaner look, and volunteers say that they're reading it a lot more now than whenever we would send them a 15-page PDF that just had all kinds of cool content, but nobody really had time to sit down and read. You can often streamline other things as well. For example, scheduling. When I came into our office, volunteers came in all throughout the day and left all throughout the day, and it was a constant interruption. So instead, we decided that we would go to a shift-based approach. Now all the volunteers come in from 9 a.m. to noon or 1 p.m. to 3. That protects 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. Staff get an hour to start their day. That protects 12 to 1 that allows staff to have a lunch, and it protects 4 p.m. to 5 p.m. Staff have time to wrap up at the end of the day. And we also only have to be ready for volunteers to show up at 9 a.m. and 1. We don't have to remember that someone's coming in at 9 and someone else is coming in at 9:30 and someone else is coming in at 10, but they said they might be late. You know, that creates a all throughout the day interruption. But creating consistent scheduling may be something that helps you streamline operations. Another thing, we're volunteer coordinators, right? Can a volunteer be trained to do it? If you have a task that's troublesome for you, ask if a volunteer can be trained to do it. It might seem obvious, but the tasks that burn you out might be the same things that bring someone else to life. Looking at tasks you don't enjoy and considering if a volunteer could do it or could be reasonably trained to do it, then you can go recruit for that person. One of the things I've found is that some volunteers enjoy data entry. Some of them enjoy filing, some enjoy newsletters, some enjoy social media or cleaning or phone calls or hospice and more. So looking at those kind of opportunities and seeing if a volunteer could be reasonably trained to do it might get something off your plate that burns you out. I don't love spending my time filing, but I've got volunteers who just love filing. They're like, I want to do admin work, but I don't want to do data entry and I don't want to do phones. I'm like, you're a filing person. Come on board. People are crazy, and that's why I like them. But for anything out there you need done, there is somebody who's passionate about it. Sometimes it's just about finding the right fit, finding the right person. I consulted with a museum that didn't have anyone who really enjoyed or understood modern technology, but I found a volunteer who loves photography, and I found a volunteer who enjoys social media. And now they get photographs of things in the museum. They're posting on social media several times a week, and it's now becoming a useful place to share awareness, to share stories, to highlight volunteers, to announce new staff, as well as to announce and share fundraiser and events, because they actually have new posts all the time on their social media. So finding someone who's passionate about it may make all the difference if your staff aren't able to accommodate it. Another area I love using trained in quotation marks is can coworkers be trained to make your job easier? Sometimes your job or a task is difficult just because your coworkers don't understand how it works. The classic example is coming and asking you, hey, do you have any volunteers available today? It's like, I don't keep them in my back pocket. They're not just sitting in a cubicle waiting for something to do. No, I don't have last minute volunteers just sitting around. But training coworkers and letting them know, managing sideways, I call it, instead of managing up, letting them know how volunteers operate and how your program is designed to work can make a big difference. One thing that's important is providing clear expectations. If you request volunteers from me, this is what you are agreeing to. Another is to make sure your communication with them is clear, telling them what works for you. I need 2 weeks notice is not an unreasonable request. Or I need you to put that in writing is not an unreasonable request. I need you to fill out this form is not an unreasonable request. They're getting volunteers from you. It's okay to ask them to make your job easier. I want to share just a little boilerplate. This will be on the slide deck if you need something like this. But I have an online form that staff can use to request volunteers. But it has a little boilerplate so they know that what they are signing up for. Because one of the problems I have is staff will reach out to me by instant messaging, or they'll ask in person, or they'll give me a phone call, or they'll text me, or they'll email me. I even have staff will come up to me when I'm tabling out in the community and be like, hey, while it's on my mind. I'm like, while it's on your mind, it's not on my mind. Go back to the office and put it in an email because I'm not going to remember that. But we created this online form. It's working so well. But this is what it says. Volunteers can help with a large amount of work, but require staff support. We will provide name, email, and phone numbers of volunteers who sign up, but by requesting volunteers, you commit to notify them of the service activity details, notify them in event of changes or cancellation, greet them at the start time, provide training or resources, provide supervision, and report back on who attended and how many hours were served. By clicking submit, you agree to the above conditions. Now, that exact boilerplate isn't going to work for everybody. Our program is built very differently. I've got 370 volunteers across 2 counties, and we assign them to 24 different sites. So the sites are managing my volunteers. I'm recruiting and onboarding them. And so this works, but it definitely lets all the sites and all of our staff know these are the things you're responsible for. I'll go find you those magical volunteers, but then you're going to have to show up. We've had things where staff are like, yeah, I need volunteers at 9 a.m. Do you mind showing up to onboard them? And I'm like, no, I'm not coming to every event that our office hosts just to manage your volunteers for you. If you're asking for volunteers, you need to be committing to these things. So clear communication as well as clear expectations, but also consistent enforcement. No matter what process you put in place, if it's a piece of paper they need to fill out, if it's just an email they need to send to you, if it's a Google form they need to go sign, you need to enforce it consistently. I am a make exceptions kind of guy. I hate when rules get in the way of getting things done. But at the same time, if I'm not consistently enforcing this, people are going to gradually stop using it. Yes, we can go back to the last slide real quick. But having a consistent process helps you as well as a staff member. Whenever all of your volunteer requests are coming by email or coming through this paper form or coming through a digital form, that's helpful. Why I don't love email is because they will say, hey, I need volunteers for an event Friday. I'm going to have to play email tag for the next half an hour to find out the location, the start time, the end time the volunteers can reliably know they get to go home. I'm going to need to find out what activities they're going to be doing. Why don't I just build a form that makes them fill out all of those categories? How many volunteers do you need? What is your rain plan? All of those kind of contingencies. Instead of just asking people to email me, it's a lot more helpful if they can just fill out this form, and that lets them know the details I'm going to need. All right, now there's one other area I want you to think through. Advanced strategies is what I call these. The first is redefining your role. Like we said at the very beginning, a lot of times our job descriptions are outdated. They're a poor reflection of what we actually do. They were made by a nonprofit person who doesn't know what volunteer management needs. And so asking to have some input in your own job description or redefining your role and putting it on paper can make a really big difference. We talk a lot about volunteer job descriptions, but we don't talk about our own near enough. The description is a fundamental document that lays out what your job should expect from you, what it should not expect from you, and what you're going to be graded on when performance reviews come along. So it's important to have some input in what your job description says. The smaller the nonprofit, the less likely your job description gets reviewed and rewritten often enough. So this could create a good opportunity for you to take a critical look at your job description and make a proposal. The opportunity will also let you talk through changes with your boss that highlight the different views of what your boss thinks your job is, what you think your job is, what your organization needs from your volunteer program, and what you want to provide through your volunteer program. The importance of a good job description can't be understated. Kathy Caprino is a job coach, and she says, if you stop doing some tasks because you feel they're outside of your scope, it could look like you're slacking if your manager thinks those are part of your job. So we're not encouraging you to quit things that aren't a part of your job, but we are suggesting that opening up a dialogue about what's in your job description can be a really helpful tool in taking the next step. Because a lot of times there is a misunderstanding or miscommunication between what you think your job role is and what your boss thinks your job role is. Here's an example that might apply universally. We all recruit volunteers, right? So if your job description says manages online recruitment ads on JustServe, Volunteer Match, and Volunteer East Tennessee, then you're stuck in a box. Instead, advocate for a change that's a little more general and gives you the freedom to decide how best to market various volunteer opportunities, given your culture, your region, your organization, and the opportunities you have. So something more along the lines of recruits volunteers through multiple mediums, including print, in-person, and virtual, not only sounds more professional, but it better represents what you actually do in your job, deciding whether I'm going to a job fair for this, whether I'm looking to recruit this kind of volunteer online, whether I want to put an ad in the newsletter or in a newspaper. It also keeps your job description from boxing you in. So keep in mind that you are the subject matter on volunteers at your organization. There might not be anybody else in your organization who can say that. So the piece of paper that is your job description is not the expert on volunteers as a subject matter, and your job description probably wasn't written by one either. So presenting yourself as the subject matter expert, having that confidence, and making a proposal to update something in your job description can be very valuable. One other example is that your job description, for example, in my case, says train volunteers. And I'm like, okay, that's not only vague, but that puts everything on me, whereas we have other people who help train volunteers. So instead, advocate for a change that says something like ensures volunteers receive training. That means I don't have to do all the training, but I'm going to be the one held accountable to make sure they get the training, whether that's by their site or by the staff person who's using them for a specific job. I'm not going to provide SHIP training, but I can make sure people are properly trained if they're going to fill that role. So ensuring that they get the training they need is a very different job expectation than the expectation that you will train them all. Now here's a fun one, redesign your workspace. All right, there's things that'll be outside of your control, but you are going to spend 25% of this year at your job. And so it might as well be comfortable. A healthy work environment should provide comfort. What would provide comfort in your area? So I keep a fan because sometimes it gets hot. I also keep a hoodie because sometimes it gets cold. So thinking about the comfort in your area, if you feel miserable at work, you're not going to do a good job at your job. You're going to burn out a lot faster. Making sure your environment is working for you instead of working against you can make a huge difference. Your environment should provide comfort. I have family photos. I have all kinds of different things that bring comfort to me. That's Miss Mary's photo right there. She's on the call today. Thank you for allowing us to use your photo. At a previous job, Mary knows about this job. At a previous job, I was given a small table as a desk in the corner of a tiny accounting office, and I had an assistant who had to work on a laptop on the corner of that same desk. Right? It doesn't take a genius to figure out why people lose productivity, lose passion, and burn out in those conditions. So I did a little bit of research and I found a desk that was designed for 2 people that would optimize the workspace. After that, we tackled getting a desk computer for the assistant and then decent chairs for both of us. I had to find donors to make some of that happen, but it made a huge difference in the comfort of the workplace. Personalizing your workspace might be doable on your own, or you might have to make budget requests, or you might have to find donors, but don't settle for uncomfortable. Improving your workspace can make a big difference in your work productivity. This is a photo of my current workspace. I have plants, I have photos. You can see a Lego ship in a bottle. I have a big collection of books that I need easily access. There's also some nostalgia pieces from the past of our program, some award recognitions, binders that I need to easily access. You can see the fan and you can see the hoodie. There's also an area rug under the chair that's more comfortable to me than just being on the hard cold floor. So just thinking through, would a bookshelf help, or would some kind of decoration help? A healthy work environment should also make the right tools accessible. You know, if you don't have the tools you need to do the job, that's something to talk to your boss about, improving the workspace. At my zoo job, we had a 53-acre property and we didn't have radios. It was a challenge to keep staff and volunteers in contact, so we advocated for getting the right tools for the job. We got some radios added. Volunteers had to walk a long distance with their supplies, so we advocated getting carts dedicated for volunteer use. We had to recruit a lot of volunteers, so I advocated for getting business cards, and volunteer uniforms were stored in cardboard boxes, so I advocated getting some plastic totes to protect them in storage. Sometimes it's just small things, but if your workspace doesn't have the right tools, then go ahead and bring that up. Again, you might have to ask for funding and wait on it. You may have to find a donor, but that's an important thing to take care of. I'll give you an example of where a donor stepped up. I wanted to create a coffee station for volunteers, and within 1 week, I had 3 Keurig donations. Volunteers are willing to donate as well, as long as you inform them of the need. Have you seen my stapler? If anyone has seen the film, it's something I laugh about all the time. If you don't have your own stapler or scissors or Sharpies, there's no reason you should be trying to do the job without the tools to do the job. And so sometimes it's a simple thing to advocate for. Your workspace should also limit disruptions. That's one of the biggest things we have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. We want our volunteer coordinators accessible, but not too accessible. So I was being stressed out, I was burning out. We had a sit-down talk with my boss, and there were a bunch of things we implemented. First off, we moved my cubicle to a location that wasn't right in the traffic flow, so I don't get constant interruptions. I now keep headphones at my desk because sometimes it's noisy. We also don't typically get to work from home, but I'm allowed to request a remote day once a month to focus on projects that need some focus. A lot of other changes were made, including making a sign that I could put up on my cubicle wall that just says, "I'm in a meeting, please send me an email or come back later." So limiting disruptions is sometimes a workspace consideration that can make a big difference. All right, finally, in addition to redefining your role and redesigning your workspace, consider sometimes what tasks could be reassigned, delegated, or referred. All right, I often jokingly call this, should somebody else do it? But it's an honest reminder that sometimes we should ask, is this a better fit for someone else? You don't want the reputation of someone who pushes everything else on other people, but once in a while it's fitting and appropriate to reassign something. Consider these considerations. Have there been recent staff additions? Is there someone new on the staff who does this job, but nobody thought to go back and take it out of everyone else's job description? That happens a lot when you add someone who does the website or does social media or is producing a newsletter of their own, and you might be able to team up instead of reduplicating all that effort. Someone who oversees marketing or does graphic design. We have a graphic design person. It will take me 3 hours to make something, but it will also take them 30 minutes to make something. So handing things off to someone who has the better work experience or skills can make a big difference. Connections or qualifications. We added a phone reassurance program where I manage volunteers and clients. I have zero experience with clients. So we talked about who on our team has those qualifications so that I don't have to develop a whole new skill set, manage a whole new data set, a whole new pool of people and needs. And so I was given permission to reassign or delegate or refer those needs to someone else. A third thing to ask is, does your organization need someone new to meet this need? If you see in the photo, this is Dylan. He was added to our team because we realized that I was getting phone calls all the time to help seniors with their technology. Maybe it's because I'm younger, or maybe it's because I'm a guy, or maybe it's because of this, or maybe because it's that, but it doesn't have anything to do with my volunteer role. We started tracking the volume of requests we got, and it really justified adding a staff member. Now, adding staff overnight doesn't just happen. We had to create volunteers who could help with this problem. Then we created some part-time opportunities that helped with it, and now we've graduated to a full-time position. But sometimes it justifies a new person. And then I want everyone to repeat after me on your own computer here. We are not in competition with other nonprofits. It's really important to realize you don't need to make wheels if there's already an organization in your area making wheels. All right, so you don't have to solve every problem, and your volunteers don't have to solve every problem. Sometimes you can refer things to other nonprofits who are built for that. An example is we have a transportation program. Our clients would love us to take them to church on Sunday. We're not going to staff the office on weekends in order to do that, but churches are already built for that. All right, all of their congregants are already driving to church on that same day for that same service. They can find someone who can give a senior a lift. And so not reduplicating our efforts is really important. Another example I had, we have that phone reassurance program, but the fact is that there are other phone reassurance programs. We can escalate crises calls to that program instead of training our volunteers to do everything. All right, I want to thank everybody for attending. This is a lot of information, so we'll be sending out the slide deck that you can look through and use it actually as a blueprint. Whenever you have a task that's troublesome, start going through that checklist. There's a lot of different angles you can look at a task from to do some creative problem solving.
Wow, like that just kind of sums up the presentation. There was a lot of us commenting back and forth in the chat box. One thing I really took away is, especially everything you were talking about, tracking is key. If you want to purchase something, if you want to add staff, if you want to do something different, you have to have that data and that evidence to back up your request. Because it was also mentioned, like in the chat box, we're kind of like teachers in that we get our own supplies a lot of the time because we may hesitate to ask supervisors or just like, maybe we don't need this. But I think to your point throughout the presentation, if you can build the case, we can limit what we actually purchase out of pocket.
Absolutely. Building the case is important. Awareness is important. People are happy to donate to a volunteer program if they're aware. But also, you might not have a budget because you don't make regular requests, so people assume you don't need a budget. But it does cost money to run a volunteer program. So making those asks or giving your organization a list of all the donations you had to solicit on your own can let them know, oh, maybe we need somebody doing this for you, soliciting donations or provide you a budget so we don't have to beg for everything.
Definitely. You mentioned something that I need. You mentioned something about a business card scanner.
Oh, yeah.
That can be on your phone. Like, is that like a website? Is that an app?
Yep, there's apps, and I was like, I remember this because Sam had one, but I just Googled and they're like the top 5 apps for scanning business cards. You know, it's one of those things that, you know, if you need it, somebody else needed it. and somebody developed the same with YouTube. If you need to learn how to do something, a mail merge, somebody out there decided to make a video. I go to YouTube to make goal thermometers or how to create an equation in Excel. I just learned how to use Canva a lot more effective. This whole presentation was done on Canva, but I watched some YouTube videos. And so, yeah, just thinking about places you can go to get those tools and resources.
Yeah, I'll do some research on, because there was a couple people who need that too. I'll do some research on the apps for some business cards. That's a great idea, because I have so many that are just kind of stuffed in a drawer that I probably will never look at again once I add them to a list or something along those lines. So having them just on my phone in case I need them again would be very helpful. I do want to open it up for questions. It is 3 o'clock, so I want to respect everyone's time. This was a great presentation, so please stay on if you have any comments or Q&A that you want to talk about with Jared, but I do want to, if anyone needs to leave, for sure you can do that. I will have Jared's presentation and a follow-up email tomorrow at the latest, and post the recording of the video. Also, thank you all again so much for letting me do this series. Jared and everyone else who was a guest speaker this year. We've had some amazing sessions. I'm going to be sending out a survey here probably by the end of the month to kind of do an overall evaluation, and then we're going to start planning for 2024. So start thinking of the topics that you want to see discussed. I'm going to kind of reach back into 2020 when we first started the series to see if we need to do kind of reiterate some things. We've had a lot of new people. One topic was dealing with difficult volunteers. So that might be something that everyone is interested in. That was a fun one to research.
Absolutely.
Yes, but thank you so much, everyone. If you have to log off, by all means, we appreciate you. Please let us know if you have any questions. And now I want to open it up to the group. So if anyone has anything that they'd like to share with Jared, any questions, floor is open. You're getting a lot of kudos in the chat box, Jared.
Yay.
As always.
I stopped sharing just so I could check out the chat.
Getting some applause. I think I laughed more in your presentation, and I love being on mute because you wouldn't be able to hear yourself with how much I was laughing. And the technology thing, you just had a picture of you and R2D2. Of course, everyone's going to call you with technology questions.
Yeah, we had a partnership with Comcast, and I ended up teaching classes for a while, but we realized it was unsustainable, but also it required a full-time person. And so that was just another step along that journey of saying, this need is interrupting Jared, but also it is a need in the community, but maybe Jared doesn't need to be doing it. What can we? Yep, absolutely.
Definitely. Well, I'm going to stop the recording, and then we'll hang out for a little while longer. So thank you everyone so much again.